The Steam Deck is old. Not for me, but a lot of people feel this way. It still has almost the same APU it was supposed to launch with nearly 3 years ago in November 2021. And in PC years, 3 years is such a long time. Now, it didn't end up actually launching in November. It got delayed and it launched in February 2022. And then it was very limited supply and people weren't even able to secure one until like mid 2022. So from that lens, the Steam Deck is closer to 2 years old. But then the Steam Deck OLED launched in November of last year, and that has improved battery life, a bigger screen, and much improved network capabilities and more. And that's not even a year old yet. So depending on who you ask, the Steam Deck is anywhere from in its infancy to practically ancient. Even I, as someone that is a huge fan of the Steam Deck, I've been using the ROG Ally X almost exclusively since I got it because yeah, more power is nice. But I still think it would be too soon to release a Steam Deck 2, and I think today's news roundup is going to show exactly why. The entire PC gaming world, including Ally and Ally X enjoyers like myself, have benefited from the Steam Deck holding on to its 3+ year old APU because it means that game devs are no longer exclusively chasing the highest fidelity graphics at the cost of everything else. We still have great looking games, but we have more scalable games, and that's way more important to me personally. So if you're someone saying that the Steam Deck is old news and it can't play AAA games in 2024, I'm here to tell you, I think you're wrong, and I'm going to explain why in this first big news story. What do you think? Are you tired of Steam Deck's graphical capabilities? Or is this still one of the best gaming devices you've ever played? Let me know, and while you do, let's get into this week's Steam Deck news. Be sure to leave a like and a sub because I am now down to my last 5,000 subs before 100K. Let's go. So just this week, we got the system requirements for 3 of the most highly anticipated games of the year, those being God of War Ragnarok, Space Marine 2, and Sonic and Shadow Generations. No one should be surprised that Sonic and Shadow Generations is going to play well on Steam Deck, but it looks like the requirements for Ragnarok and Space Marine 2 are very Steam Deck friendly, and at least to a degree that is a little surprising. Now, to address the elephant in the room immediately, there's an increasingly strong chance that God of War Ragnarok won't be playable on the Steam Deck or Linux at all, but it doesn't look like that's going to be because of old hardware. According to a new blog post from Sony, this game should get 30 FPS at 1080p on the low preset with ancient hardware. We're talking the GTX 1060 in i5 4670K and 8GB of RAM. What's more is that Sony also said this was using the native resolution without applying any upscaling technology, so if we were to apply some upscaling technology like FSR or XeSS, then this game should perform even better on said ancient hardware. As a result, this game should also play well on the Steam Deck. Well, like I said, it should. Neither Sony nor Valve have said whether or not this game is going to play on Linux, but unfortunately the Steam page says that it will require a PlayStation Network account, and up until now the PlayStation overlay that is used to log into PSN has not been compatible with Linux. It's still unclear why this is the case, but given the relative silence from both Valve and Sony, I'm inclined to believe that there is some kernel level software involved. My best guess, considering that this is a single player game, is that Sony have implemented some form of kernel level anti-tampering to keep people from illicitly obtaining trophies. Steam achievements are notoriously easy to get. There exists software out there that just lets you unlock Steam achievements for you, and in all likelihood, if you wanted to put some protection around this, it's possible that you would need to look into some kernel level solution to ensure that players weren't gaming the system, as it were. That's just my speculation, but that's also what happens when details aren't provided. People are going to jump to their own conclusions using the best information they have available. Still though, the reason I say that the entire PC gaming community benefits from this is because if it would play pretty well on the Steam Deck, then it would play even better on the Lenovo Legion Go or either of the Allies. Although I'd love to get rid of the Windows partition on my Ally X, it seems like that's not going to happen anytime soon, especially if I want to play games like Ragnarok on my PC handheld. Likewise, and as I mentioned, we also learned of the system requirements for Space Marine 2, and this one surprised me a little more than God of War Ragnarok. At least with Ragnarok, we know that the engine is largely the same as God of War 2018, and it plays decently well on a PS4, so it was fairly likely that it was going to play decently on older PC tech. But Space Marine 2 is looking gorgeous, and I guess I didn't realize how scalable the Swarm engine is, because honestly, I don't think I've ever played any games on that engine. In any case, the minimum specs here call for GTX 1060 again, but this time in i5 8600K, and all of this results in another 1080p 30 at low. No word on whether this is at native resolution, but honestly, I would consider it pretty scummy if these specs were assuming some sort of upscaling technology. There are two concerns I still have for the Steam Deck for this game. The first is the RAM. This game calls for 8 gigabytes of RAM and 6 gigabytes of VRAM, which is bumping up incredibly close to the Steam Deck's 16 gigabytes, and we've seen other games that just crash on the Steam Deck simply because they've saturated all the memory on deck. The second concern is that this game is more CPU intensive than the previous example of Ragnarok, so again, I do wonder how those resources are going to compete with each other when you have lots of enemies on screen. So I wouldn't rush to say that this will play well on Steam Deck yet, but I'm more optimistic than I was about a week ago. Finally, there's Sonic and Shadow Generations. I'll spare you the details here since I don't think anyone doubted that this game was going to play well on deck. It's looking good, and I actually intend to pick this up because Sonic Generations could use a nice modernization, and more importantly, Sega have now committed to keeping the original game alive. Unfortunately, the old game will still be delisted from Steam, but in response to our feedback, they will instead still make the original game available via other bundles of Sonic titles on Steam. They also said that you can still mod the Steam version, so that is incredible. Personally, I'd call this a happy compromise for all parties, so I am looking forward to this hitting Steam in October. In other news, it looks like we are inching closer and closer to an announcement of Final Fantasy XVI for PC. It appears there is already a Game Ready driver profile for FF16 in the NVIDIA Game Ready and Studio Driver 560.81 that released late last week. Now, FF16 came to PS5 over a year ago back in June of 2022, so I'm hoping we are officially past the exclusivity window and that this could come to PC any day now, but honestly, who knows? Part of me would be really excited for a shadow drop, but I'm not sure that it would be the right choice for Square, who has already seen pretty poor sales for FF16, at least according to their own projections. Based on their latest earnings report, and as reported by Eurogamer, quote, the company's overall net sales dropped by 18.4% year on year for the most recent quarter, driven in part due to a decline in sales of new games, end quote. To the extent that Square has been profitable at all, these profits seem to be thanks to MMOs and mobile games, with their MMO earnings making up for 68% of its profits, and the roster of mobile games accounting for 31%, leaving a measly 0.5% for non-MMO games and non-mobile games. Now, you could probably say that this is all their own doing. Here's a tweet from Alex Battaglia of Digital Foundry where he says, quote, maybe they should release their games on more platforms like all the other successful publishers, end quote. That has of course been an incredibly hot topic as we've heard more and more about the disappointing sales for both FF16 and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, with many people pointing out that they would have better sales and in turn better profits if they had done multi-platform releases from the start. To that end, a shadow drop of FF16 may just feel like they're sending it to die on the PC. I am very curious to see how this is all going to land. Do you think this is going to be a big seller on PC? Do you think that they should have done a multi-platform release from the start? Let me know in the comments. Of course, Microsoft is a company that happened to get away with a great shadow drop last year with Hi-Fi Rush, but they just pulled another one on us with yet another re-release of Doom and Doom 2. Listen, the only thing more surprising than how often Doom and Doom 2 have been released is how often these re-releases have actually been pretty damn good, and this one is no exception. It is hard to overstate how good of an update this is, and in fact, I feel like a ton of outlets are actually underselling how good this is. This is essentially the best and most comprehensive official Doom port thus far. So this title, Doom plus Doom 2, was shadow dropped at QuakeCon, which happened this past week, and right off the bat, this title is already in your library if you already own Doom or Doom 2, so that alone is a great strategy that Nintendo and others should be learning from. I've only ever bought Doom and Doom 2 once on Steam, and since then there's been at least 2 big re-releases, including this one, that I didn't have to pay any extra money for. Additionally, you could still play the previous versions of these games if you go to the entry for the individual title, but if you want to play this new title, just look for the entry in your library that says Doom plus Doom 2. This version is now considered the definitive edition. It includes online, cross-platform deathmatch, and co-op for up to 16 players, community-published single-player mod support with an in-game mod browser, an optimized renderer, accessibility options, and there's also an optional modern soundtrack composed by Andrew Holshow, and Andrew has been amazing. He's worked on excellent soundtracks like Dusk, Medieval, and Proteus. As far as single player content goes, you get the Doom and Doom 2 campaigns that you would expect, like Master Levels and Evolution, but you also get a brand new episode called Legacy of Rust. This was made in collaboration across 3 studios, id Software, Night Dive Studios, and Machine Games. And this is the first official episode since Doom 2 to have new weapons and new demons, so that alone I would say is reason to revisit this game. There's also Sigil, which is a modern expansion by John Romero, as well as No Rest for the Living, which was originally released with the Doom 3 BFG edition. So this version of the classic games was developed by Night Dive Studios, who are known for modernizing retro shooters using their Kex engine. They are the ones that officially brought Doom 64 to PC, and now with bringing the original Dooms to Kex, that has allowed them to add entirely new features like 8-player split screen and a weapon carousel for those controller users like me. The whole co-op mode has been revamped, so if all the players die, then you lose and the level's going to restart. But if you want to respawn your teammates, then you're going to have to clear all the enemies in an area or find a safe place to hide. Of course, it's not just local multiplayer. You can play online and crossplay on all platforms. They added 25 community maps to Deathmatch, and now there's 43 in total. And my favorite feature is how easy it is to get mods. You can publish any single player mod using the PC version, and then any player on any platform can browse the community mods, download them, and play them easily, again, just using the in-game browser. I started playing this total conversion mod called Wrecker, where you play as a Viking warrior and you start with a bow and you collect souls. It's pretty badass. Oh, and yeah, of course, there is a secret behind the waterfall, of course. Finally, there's an id vault where you can explore concept art from Doom and Doom 2, stuff that was left on the cutting room floor like textures, weapons, items, and even early versions of monsters. All of that's pretty cool, and honestly, I'm just floored by how good this update is. It's really a model example of how modernization should be done, in my opinion, but for some reason, this is listed as unsupported as Steam Deck, but that's just Valve being silly gooses, because as far as I can tell, this game plays great on Steam Deck and on Linux, so definitely take a look. Likewise, id Studios also announced mod support for Doom Eternal on PC. I haven't checked this one out yet, but they said that they were inspired and impressed by how the Eternal community has been creating great mods without any official tools, and as a result, they released a public beta of id Studio, and that's going to help creators make mods for Eternal. Alongside that, they also added an opt-in mod browser to allow players to easily browse and play mods. So again, very cool stuff. The last Doom related announcement that I do want to talk about is SNES Doom, SNES Doom. Now this doesn't relate to PC whatsoever, but I think it's worth mentioning because again, I think people are not really talking about how big of a deal this is. Limited Run Games announced that they're releasing a definitive SNES Doom cartridge that adds performance improvement, circle strafing, and rumble support with an all-new controller. It all sounds kind of ridiculous, to be honest. First of all, we need to remember that this is a game that had a Super FX chip, and it's kind of insane that LRG are releasing an obviously unlicensed cartridge that uses a Super FX chip in 2024. Well, sort of. So the only person I saw talking about this was Mad Little Pixel. Shout out to Mad Little Pixel, but he did some digging on this subject, and apparently the original developer that ported Doom to SNES is Randy Linden, and he's now been employed by LRG for like the last couple years. He's working on this project, obviously, and he tweeted that they have their own custom chip that's compatible with Super FX, but it increases the memory and the speed. Then when he was asked if that custom chip is an FPGA, he did say that the current iteration is FPGA, but that may not be the final chip. And then again, on top of that, they're gonna sell this with a custom controller that has rumble support for Super Nintendo. I don't fully understand, but I am looking forward to this regardless. Next up, you should know that Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is now on Steam, and it does play amazingly well on Steam Deck, but there are a few things that you're going to want to be aware of. Ubisoft was advertising this as being incredibly playable on the Steam Deck, even able to sustain 90 FPS on ultra settings. While this is true and it's a remarkable feat for sure, it does seem that at this preset you can encounter crashes due to spikes in RAM usage, at least according to Steam Deck HQ. Noah from Steam Deck HQ said at the time of the crash, this game was using using 14 gigabytes of system RAM with 6.5 gigabytes of VRAM, which is way more than the deck can handle. To that end, Noah recommends using the high settings instead of the ultra settings, which is fine by me. Additionally, this uses Ubisoft Connect, but you may not need to log in if you've already logged into Ubisoft Connect at another point on the Steam Deck. Thankfully, this game does have full offline support despite the required launcher. Additionally, the Lost Crown does support cloud saves, but only through UB Connect, not through Steam Cloud Saves. I believe, but haven't tested, that this means you should be able to transfer saves from the UB launcher version to the Steam version and vice versa, though I imagine that there are very few people that actually want to do that. Personally, I do own the non-Steam version, and I've played that using the excellent non-Steam launchers, and this is easily one of my top 3 favorite games of the year, and honestly one of the best Metroidvanias I've ever played. It has a variety of awesome mechanics, but honestly it just nails 2 of my favorite things in video games: platforming and combat. The combat feels a lot like a 2D Devil May Cry sort of game, with launchers, the ability to chase your enemy in the air with dashes, and parries. Everything about this game is a ton of fun, and if you're waiting for a Silk Song but you haven't played this game yet, well, you should check it out. Relatedly, Rogue Prince of Persia recently got an update called the Warriors Ascension update. Of course, Rogue Prince of Persia is the roguelite Prince of Persia game made by the developers of Dead Cells, and it's currently in early access. This update adds difficulty modifiers and some new skills. It seems pretty neat, and you can get the 2 games together in a discounted bundle in case you're a big Prince fan. Alright, there was a pretty big SteamOS update over the weekend that got a whole lot of attention, and normally I love this sort of speculation, but in this instance, I do think it's a bit misplaced. So the SteamOS update is 3.6.9 beta. There are a couple notable updates in the changelog, but the one that caught a lot of attention is this line right here that says, added support for extra ROG Ally keys. Many huge outlets, including PC Gamer, picked this story up and claimed that it, quote, hints at an imminent general install with ROG Ally support added, and I'm just not entirely convinced. There's 2 ways to look at this update. First, there's the fact that it costs Valve virtually nothing to pull this support into SteamOS. It's an update that was pushed upstream to the Linux kernel, and Valve cherry-picked it from the upstream and pulled it into the kernel being used for SteamOS. Valve regularly cherry-picks updates from the kernel for controller support, so that is relatively unremarkable. What is remarkable, however, is that Valve included this detail in the patch notes. They could have just not pointed out that they added support for ROG Ally keys, and this most likely doesn't even become a story. But they did add it, so that alone could be reason enough to think that Valve is hinting at a version of SteamOS that supports not just the Steam Deck, but also other devices like the ROG Ally and Ally X. What do you think about this? Do you think Valve is actually going to do this? And definitely let me know in the comments and we can discuss it. Notably, they also added support for Windows for the Bluetooth driver. Here, they're specifically referring to the Steam Deck OLED, which does not have full support via Windows yet. By adding this driver, they get at least one step closer to the goal, which they promised almost a year ago now. The big fix for this update is that they improved recovery situations where the Steam installation could get corrupted. They did this because of the launcher Jackbox Megapicker, which at the time was somehow managing to corrupt your Steam installation. By corrupting Steam itself, the deck couldn't launch into game mode and you were left with a black screen. Then you would have to follow some really cumbersome steps that aren't published anywhere to get into desktop mode and recover your Steam installation. Anyway, Valve says that they've improved recovery from situations like this, but they didn't say what they actually did. I've yet to test it, but I hope it automatically takes you to desktop mode where you can then reinstall Steam with your game library still intact. That's going to do it for this week's Deck News Roundup, but I should say that the last few weeks of game releases have been amazing on Steam Deck, and I do want to talk about some of the games that have been coming out recently, so definitely keep an eye out for that video coming soon. Alright, I hope you're all having a wonderful week. Deck Gang out. Goodbye!